The night still smelled of champagne and cheap perfume when Ambrose Blackwell slipped through the door of his penthouse apartment. He thought the city was still asleep, but he didn't realize the storm waiting inside. His tie was undone, his hair tousled, his lips still wet from the kisses of another woman. He had spent the entire night flaunting his mistress in public, believing his pregnant wife, Jacqueline, was too weak, too naive, too fragile to ever challenge him. He thought she would cry in silence, swallow her humiliation, and keep carrying his child without complaint. But Ambrose was wrong. Because while he was sipping expensive wine in dim hotel rooms, Jacqueline had been awake, holding her belly with one hand and a stack of legal documents with the other. She was tired of being the quiet, obedient wife. She was tired of pretending everything was fine while her husband paraded another woman through Manhattan's nightclubs. Her heart had broken too many times, but this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't alone. When the clock struck 10 that morning, Ambrose walked into what he thought was a family breakfast. The Blackwell family often gathered on Sundays in the grand lounge of the penthouse. The place gleamed with Italian marble floors, golden chandeliers, and the cold smell of money. Ambrose expected the usual routine. His wife sitting silently, his mother gossiping, his father boasting about business deals. But today, Jacqueline was not in her usual pale dress, nor was she trembling in the corner like a shadow. She was sitting tall, her 6-month pregnant belly visible beneath a tailored navy dress, and beside her, with an open briefcase and a pair of sharp glasses glinting under the morning light, sat Evelyn Carter, one of the city's most ruthless divorce lawyers. Ambrose froze, his smirk faltered, his skin drained of color. Because in that single moment, Ambrose knew. The game he thought he controlled was about to collapse. The tension in the room was suffocating. His parents shifted uneasily, sensing something unusual. His mistress, who had followed him into the gathering with shameless confidence, twirled her hair and smiled as if she were the new queen of the Blackwell Empire. But when Evelyn Carter lifted her chin and spread a thick file of photographs across the mahogany table, silence swallowed the air. Hotel receipts, pictures, text messages. Every lie Ambrose had told, every secret meeting, every betrayal, all laid bare in ink and paper. Ambrose's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He reached for his glass of water, but his hand trembled. His father's eyes narrowed, his mother gasped, and Jacqueline finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "After last night, Ambrose, you left me no choice. You thought I would break, but today I brought the law with me." Ambrose's mistress let out a nervous laugh, but no one joined her. The weight of Jacqueline's words pressed on every corner of the room. The husband who once strutted through gala halls, showered with applause, now sat pale and shrinking in his own living room. And this was just the beginning. Because Jacqueline wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to cry. She wasn't even here to fight for his love anymore. She was here to end it. To end the charade, the betrayal, and the humiliation. And to reclaim the power he had stolen from her. The air thickened. The silence grew sharper. All eyes turned to Ambrose, waiting for his response. But Ambrose, the man who had once commanded boardrooms and silenced rivals with a single glare, could not even find his words. His lips parted, but the only thing he managed was a hoarse whisper. "Jacqueline, what are you doing?" Her answer cut like a blade. "Taking back my dignity." The room shook as Evelyn Carter slid the divorce papers across the table. And Ambrose realized, for the first time in his life, he was about to lose everything. Jacqueline Mitchell Blackwell never thought her life would turn into a cautionary tale whispered over coffee tables. At 29, she should have been glowing with joy, preparing for the arrival of her first child, and savoring the security of a marriage built on love. But instead, she was carrying the weight of betrayal while carrying the life of her unborn son. Her story had always looked like a fairy tale from the outside. A small-town girl who had grown up in upstate New York, she was raised in a modest home with parents who believed in hard work and dignity above all else. Her mother was a schoolteacher, her father a mechanic. They didn't have wealth, but they had values: honesty, perseverance, loyalty. Jacqueline grew up believing in those virtues, believing that love meant forever, that promises meant something. That belief was what made her fall for Ambrose Blackwell in the first place. Ambrose wasn't just any man. He was the son of one of Manhattan's most powerful real estate families. He was magnetic, ambitious, a man who seemed to know how to bend the world to his will. When Jacqueline met him at a charity fundraiser during her university years, she was struck by his confidence. He had a way of making the entire room turn toward him, as if he carried his own gravity. To Jacqueline, he seemed larger than life. But he also looked at her differently than anyone else ever had. At least that's what she believed then. He told her she was special, unique, unlike the superficial women he was surrounded by in his high society world. For a girl from a humble background, those words pierced straight into her heart. 6 months later, she was wearing a diamond ring. Their wedding was the kind of spectacle magazines love to feature. A luxury ceremony at the Plaza Hotel, chandeliers glittering, violins echoing, paparazzi flashing. Jacqueline, in a lace gown that seemed spun from dreams, thought she was stepping into forever. Guests whispered that she was lucky, that she had captured Manhattan's rising star. But Jacqueline thought Ambrose was the lucky one, because she was willing to give him her entire heart. She gave up more than just her heart. She gave up her dreams. Before marrying, Jacqueline had been on her way to building a career in interior design. She loved architecture, the way spaces could tell stories. She had studied tirelessly, sketched through the night, dreamed of opening her own design studio one day. But Ambrose wanted her to play a different role. The devoted wife, the quiet supporter, the woman who stayed in the background while he climbed toward power. At first, she didn't mind. She thought that's what love was, sacrifice. She thought their partnership meant his dreams were her dreams. So she left her ambitions behind, turned her focus to supporting his career, and built their life together in his shadow. But shadows are cold. Slowly, Jacqueline began to realize she was fading. Her days were filled with silence in the penthouse while Ambrose worked late nights, his phone buzzing with messages he didn't want her to see. He became more distant, more impatient. When she finally got pregnant, she thought it would change things. She thought fatherhood would soften him, bring him closer. For a brief moment, she even believed it had. He kissed her belly, whispered promises, and told her she was the love of his life. But that illusion shattered the night she caught the faint trace of another woman's perfume on his suit. It wasn't just once. It became a pattern. Rumors began to circle among Manhattan's elite, whispers of Ambrose seen at late dinners, slipping into hotels, entertaining women at galas while Jacqueline stayed home. She asked him about it, but his answers were sharp, dismissive. "Don't be paranoid," he snapped. "You should focus on the baby, not gossip." Her heart broke, but she stayed. She stayed because she thought love could be salvaged, because she thought their child deserved a whole family. But when Ambrose stopped coming home at night, when she found lipstick smudges on his collar, when he didn't even bother to hide anymore, she knew the truth. She wasn't a wife to him anymore. She was an obstacle. And yet, Jacqueline was not as weak as Ambrose thought. Her quietness was not surrender. Her tears were not the end. Somewhere deep inside her, the values her parents raised her with, dignity, perseverance, courage, began to resurface. She realized that staying silent was no longer an option. Her baby deserved a mother who stood tall, not one who bowed to humiliation. So she began to prepare. While Ambrose thought she was too broken to resist, Jacqueline was meeting with lawyers. She found Evelyn Carter, a woman known for her iron will and unshakable presence in court. Evelyn didn't just see a heartbroken wife. She saw a fighter. Together, they built a plan. A plan not just to leave Ambrose, but to confront him in the one way he never expected. Publicly, in front of the very people he valued more than his own wife. Jacqueline spent sleepless nights collecting evidence, documenting every betrayal, every lie. She carried her baby with one hand and her dignity with the other, waiting for the moment when she would finally stand face to face with Ambrose, no longer as the obedient wife, but as the woman ready to end the charade. And that moment had come. Because when Ambrose walked into the family gathering after a night with his mistress, he thought he was still untouchable. But Jacqueline was no longer the woman he remembered. She was stronger, sharper, and no longer afraid. And when her eyes locked with his across the room, Ambrose knew this was not the same Jacqueline he had married. This was the Jacqueline who had come to destroy his lies. The Blackwell penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress of wealth, a monument to power, and a stage built for appearances. Perched high above Manhattan, the glass walls offered sweeping views of the city. Glittering lights, endless avenues, the Hudson flowing like liquid silver beneath the skyline. But inside, the air was colder than the steel beams that held the building together. This was where Ambrose Blackwell lived, worked, and played. To him, the penthouse was proof that he had won the game of life. Every marble tile, every golden chandelier, every leather armchair imported from Italy whispered of victory. He loved hosting guests here. Investors, politicians, celebrities. It was a place where he could show off his influence, where laughter clinked with champagne flutes and deals were signed with the stroke of a pen. But to Jacqueline, the penthouse had always felt like a cage. When she first moved in after their wedding, she tried to convince herself it was magical. She marveled at the spiral staircase, the crystal chandeliers, the private terrace with a view of Central Park. Friends from her small hometown gasped when she sent them photos. They told her she was lucky. But the longer she lived there, the more she realized the truth. The walls were too high, the rooms too wide, the silence too heavy. Ambrose filled the penthouse with everything money could buy, but he left no space for warmth. The air always smelled faintly of cologne and ink, never of home-cooked meals or fresh flowers. Even when Jacqueline decorated with her own touch, soft curtains, framed photos, a vase of daisies, Ambrose brushed it aside, saying it made the place look cheap. The penthouse became a reflection of him, grand, cold, and lonely. It was also the backdrop of her worst humiliations. She remembered the nights she waited by the window, watching headlights approach, hoping it was Ambrose finally coming home. Instead, hours passed, and when he did arrive, he reeked of liquor and perfume. She remembered the dinner parties where she sat at the far end of the table, her smile forced, while Ambrose charmed their guests and ignored her. The penthouse was filled with laughter, but none of it was hers. Now, that same penthouse was about to become something else entirely, a courtroom. When Jacqueline told Evelyn Carter her plan, the lawyer nodded sharply. Make him face it here in his sanctuary. That's where the fall will sting the most. So it was decided. The family meeting would take place in the lounge of the Blackwell penthouse. The room was the heart of the empire, a space lined with dark oak shelves filled with rare books no one read, a massive fireplace carved from Italian marble, and an oval dining table polished so bright it reflected faces like a mirror. At the center of the table usually sat Ambrose, with Jacqueline quietly at his side. But this morning, the arrangement was different. Jacqueline sat at the head of the table. Evelyn Carter sat beside her, papers neatly stacked, pen in hand, expression sharp as a blade. Across from them, Ambrose's parents shifted uneasily in their seats. Harold Blackwell, Ambrose's father, was a man of iron hair and iron temper. He had built the family fortune through ruthless real estate acquisitions, and he despised weakness in any form. Next to him sat Margaret Blackwell, a woman draped in pearls and silence, her gaze darting nervously as though scanning for a safe escape. And then there was Cassandra. Ambrose had been reckless enough to bring his mistress into the lion's den. Cassandra Monroe, barely 25, with red lipstick smeared like a flag of victory, sat smugly at Ambrose's side. She wore a designer dress that clung to her every curve, a deliberate contrast to Jacqueline's modest elegance. Her eyes flickered with triumph, as if she believed she had already won. The atmosphere in the lounge was suffocating. The clinking of a spoon against a teacup echoed too loudly. The ticking of the grandfather clock scraped against every nerve. Even the city outside, usually roaring with car horns and sirens, seemed to hush in anticipation. Jacqueline sat still, but her heart was pounding. She rested her hand on her belly, steadying herself with the quiet rhythm of the life inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself today, she was fighting for her child. When Ambrose finally strolled in, late as always, his swagger filled the room. His tuxedo jacket was slightly wrinkled, his hair disheveled from the night before. He looked like a man who had been celebrating instead of sleeping. His smirk widened when he saw Cassandra already seated. He kissed her hand boldly, as if daring Jacqueline to react. But then his eyes met Jacqueline's. Something shifted. She was no longer the fragile woman he had grown used to ignoring. Her back was straight, her eyes clear, her presence commanding. And the woman seated beside her, Evelyn Carter, with her cold stare and thick file, sent a chill down his spine. Ambrose faltered, just slightly, but it was enough. "Jacqueline," he said smoothly, trying to recover. "You look different today." "I am different," she replied, her voice steady, cutting through the silence like glass. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. The weight of history, betrayal, and power pressed into the space between them. This was the house Ambrose had built, the empire he believed was unshakable. But Jacqueline had transformed it into the stage of his downfall. The city lights glimmered outside like 1,000 watchful eyes, as if New York itself was waiting to see what would unfold. The chandeliers glittered above, the marble floor gleamed below, and in that vast room of wealth and silence, the air crackled with tension. For years, Jacqueline had been a ghost in this penthouse. But today, she was the fire. And when Evelyn Carter slowly opened her briefcase, the first document sliding across the table, everyone in that cold, glittering room realized the battle for the Blackwell Empire had just begun. Ambrose Blackwell was the kind of man people either envied or feared. In Manhattan's elite circles, his name carried weight. He was ruthless in business, charming at parties, and arrogant in every way that power allows. People said he could talk an investor into signing away millions with just a smile. Others said he could destroy a rival with a single phone call. For years, Jacqueline had believed his charisma was magnetic, but she now saw what lay beneath: greed, vanity, and a hunger that could never be satisfied. Ambrose thrived on appearances. He drove the rarest cars, wore custom Italian suits, and dined in restaurants where the bill for two could buy a family a month's rent. To him, life was a performance, and he always played the lead role. He believed he was untouchable, that no one could ever expose his weaknesses, especially not Jacqueline, the quiet wife he had pushed into the background. But the truth was simple. Behind the sharp tuxedos and polished shoes, Ambrose was a coward. When confronted, he laughed it off. When caught, he lied. And when cornered, he attacked. For him, power wasn't just about business. It was about control. Control over investors, control over his employees, and worst of all, control over his wife. He believed Jacqueline would never leave. She was pregnant, financially tied to him, socially dependent on his name. In his mind, she had no escape. And then there was Cassandra. Cassandra Monroe was everything Ambrose thought he wanted. 25, beautiful, bold, and shameless. She had been a junior marketing associate at one of his subsidiary companies. Ambrose noticed her at a corporate gala, where she wore a scarlet gown and laughed just a little too loudly at his jokes. She knew exactly how to play the part. The wide eyes, the flattering words, the way her hand lingered on his arm. Ambrose, already bored of Jacqueline's quiet grace, was captivated by Cassandra's fire. At first, she was discreet. A late-night dinner, a weekend business trip, a hotel suite booked under another name. But soon, discretion became arrogance. Cassandra wasn't satisfied with being a secret. She wanted recognition, jewels, the spotlight. She wanted to be photographed on Ambrose's arm, wanted the world to whisper her name. And Ambrose, intoxicated by her youth and flattery, gave in. He flaunted her at exclusive clubs. He brought her to art auctions. He even dared to take her to the Metropolitan Opera, where half the city's elite whispered behind their programs while Jacqueline stayed home. Each time, he convinced himself he was untouchable. He thought Jacqueline would endure it, because she had no other choice. Cassandra, on the other hand, thrived on Jacqueline's silence. To her, every tear Jacqueline shed was proof of her own victory. Every time Ambrose ignored his wife for her, Cassandra felt like she had won. She strutted into the penthouse with her lipstick-stained smile, pretending she was already the new Mrs. Blackwell. But beneath Cassandra's confidence was something more dangerous: ambition. She wasn't just after Ambrose's affection, she was after his empire. She whispered into his ear about expanding his business, advised him to cut off old partners, and encouraged him to take bigger risks. To Ambrose, she seemed like a partner who believed in his vision. In truth, Cassandra believed only in herself. She knew that if Jacqueline were pushed aside, she would gain not just Ambrose's name, but also his wealth and influence. That was why, on the morning of the family meeting, Cassandra walked into the penthouse lounge with her head high. She thought this was the moment she would be legitimized. She thought Ambrose would finally make it clear to everyone. Jacqueline was finished, and Cassandra was the future. But Cassandra underestimated one thing. She underestimated Jacqueline. As Evelyn Carter spread the evidence across the table, Cassandra's smile flickered. The photos of hotel receipts, the texts Ambrose had sent in the middle of the night, the credit card bills, they weren't just embarrassing. They were damning. Cassandra leaned closer to Ambrose, her hand tightening on his arm, her red nails digging into his skin. "Do something," she hissed under her breath. But Ambrose could feel the heat of every eye in the room. His father's glare burned with disappointment. His mother's eyes brimmed with shame. Evelyn's sharp gaze pinned him like a predator. And Jacqueline wasn't trembling or begging. She was calm, strong. For the first time in his life, Ambrose felt cornered. He tried to laugh it off. "Really, Jacqueline? Is this what it's come to? Dragging a lawyer into our family breakfast? Do you want to humiliate me?" Her reply was simple. "No, Ambrose, you humiliated yourself." Cassandra's smugness faltered. She had expected Jacqueline to crumble, but instead she was rising. The room's energy was shifting. For the first time, Cassandra realized that being Ambrose's mistress might not secure her future. It might destroy her with him. Ambrose, however, couldn't see it yet. He was too blinded by pride. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the lounge. "I built this empire. Everything you have is because of me. Do you really think you can take me down with a few pieces of paper?" Evelyn Carter leaned forward, her voice sharp and deliberate. "These aren't just pieces of paper, Mr. Blackwell. They are evidence. Evidence that will not only secure Jacqueline's freedom, but also expose your misconduct to the public. Judges love cases like this, especially when they involve a man flaunting his mistress while his pregnant wife sits at home." The silence after her words was deafening. Even Cassandra shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Ambrose's smirk finally broke. His confidence slipped like a mask torn away. For the first time, the great Ambrose Blackwell looked small. But Jacqueline wasn't finished. She placed her hand over her belly, her gaze steady. "You thought I was weak. You thought I would stay silent. But today, Ambrose, the world will see the truth." And in that instant, Ambrose realized he was no longer the predator. He was the prey. The silence in the Blackwell penthouse was suffocating. Every person in the room could feel it pressing against their skin, crawling into their lungs. Ambrose sat at the long oak table, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between the damning photographs and the lawyer's cold stare. Cassandra clung to his arm, whispering under her breath, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of panic in her eyes. For years, Ambrose had played his role perfectly. The devoted son, the brilliant businessman, the dazzling host of Manhattan's most glittering parties. He had built his image like a skyscraper, floor by floor, until the city believed in his invincibility. But now, in his own penthouse, the foundation was cracking, and the people who mattered most were watching. Harold Blackwell's face was stone. His voice, when it came, was sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Is this true, Ambrose?" Ambrose swallowed hard. "Father, it's not what it looks like." Margaret Blackwell let out a trembling gasp. "My God, Ambrose, how could you?" Ambrose's cheeks flushed with rage. He hated weakness, and right now he looked weak. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "This is absurd. She's exaggerating. She's using her pregnancy as a shield. Jacqueline, stop this nonsense before you embarrass yourself further." But Evelyn Carter was already opening another file. She slid a stack of papers across the polished wood. "Hotel records, charges made with your corporate credit card, surveillance footage from the Waldorf, signed receipts with your handwriting. Do you still want to call this nonsense, Mr. Blackwell?" Ambrose's mouth snapped shut. His eyes darted to the documents, recognizing his own signature, his own mistakes. Cassandra stiffened beside him, realizing that the glamorous ride she had hitched herself to was heading straight into a storm. And then came the dagger. Jacqueline reached into her purse and pulled out a slim black phone. Her fingers moved with steady precision as she unlocked the screen and pressed play. The video projected onto the television across the lounge. The room gasped. There was Ambrose, caught in high-definition clarity, laughing with Cassandra at a rooftop bar. His hand on her thigh, his lips against her neck, his voice bragging to a colleague. Jacqueline? She's boring. She's just the mother of my child. Cassandra is the one who excites me. She's the real future." The words echoed through the room like a gunshot. Margaret covered her mouth with shaking hands, Harold's fists clenched against the table. Evelyn watched coolly, her expression unreadable. And Cassandra, caught on camera, stared at the floor, her lipstick smile fading into ashes. Ambrose lunged forward, fumbling for the remote. "Turn that off! That video is private. It's—" Jacqueline's voice sliced through his desperation. "Private? No, Ambrose. When you humiliate your wife in public, when you bring your mistress into our home, nothing is private anymore." Her words landed like a thunderclap. Ambrose froze, his eyes wide, his mask of arrogance finally slipping. The betrayal wasn't just whispered behind closed doors anymore. It was out in the open, undeniable, humiliating. The man who had strutted through the city believing himself untouchable was being stripped bare in front of his parents, his mistress, and the woman he had underestimated. For Jacqueline, it was both agony and liberation. Watching the video, hearing her husband dismiss her as if she were nothing, still burned. But showing it here, forcing him to face the truth in front of witnesses, gave her strength. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one being silenced. She was the one holding the weapon. Cassandra shifted nervously, her hand slipping from Ambrose's arm. She could feel the room turning against him, and by extension, against her. Her plan to bask in the glow of his power was disintegrating by the second. She glanced at Harold, who was glaring at her as though she were a stain on the Blackwell name. For the first time, Cassandra wondered if she should have stayed in her place. Ambrose tried to regain control, but his words stumbled. This is all twisted. Jacqueline, you've manipulated this. You're trying to ruin me." "No," she said firmly. "You ruined yourself." The weight of her words silenced the room again. Jacqueline's hand rested protectively on her belly, her back straight, her eyes unwavering. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the one leading the charge. Harold finally spoke, his voice low but deadly. "Ambrose, do you realize what you've done? This isn't just about your marriage. This is about the Blackwell name, our business, our reputation, and you've dragged it through the mud." Ambrose's face crumpled. He had spent his entire life chasing his father's approval, desperate to be seen as his equal. Now, in one morning, he had destroyed it. Margaret's voice broke. "Jacqueline, darling, I had no idea." Jacqueline's eyes softened briefly. She wasn't here to punish Margaret. She wasn't even here to seek Harold's validation. She was here to reclaim her dignity. Ambrose's hand slammed against the table again, his desperation spilling out. "You can't do this to me, Jacqueline. Think of the baby. Think of everything I've given you." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "You gave me betrayal. You gave me humiliation. But you never gave me respect. And I won't let my child grow up in a house built on lies." The words hung heavy in the air. Ambrose staggered back as if struck. For once, he couldn't find an argument, couldn't summon his charm. The truth had cornered him, and there was no escape. Cassandra leaned back in her chair, her silence louder than any defense. Even she couldn't save him now. Jacqueline looked around the room, her gaze steady, her presence unshakable. "You wanted to make a spectacle of me, Ambrose. You wanted to parade your mistress in front of everyone. But today, the spectacle is yours." And as Evelyn Carter lifted the divorce papers and placed them directly in front of Ambrose, the world he had built on arrogance and deceit began to collapse in front of everyone's eyes. The documents lay on the table like a death sentence. The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy with the weight of every secret that had just been exposed. Ambrose stared at the divorce papers as though they were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. Cassandra had shrunk into her chair, her once bright confidence evaporating. Harold's face was dark with disappointment, Margaret's with quiet shame. But Jacqueline was trembling, not outwardly, not in the way that would give Ambrose satisfaction, but deep inside, her body quaked under the pressure. She held her chin high, her eyes clear, but her heart was pounding so fiercely she feared the child inside her could feel it. For months, she had gathered courage. For weeks, she had plotted, and for days, she had prayed for the strength to see this through. Now that the moment was here, reality hit with brutal force. Her husband had betrayed her. Publicly, shamelessly, And now, even as she claimed her dignity back, she realized the enormity of what she was doing. She wasn't just ending a marriage, she was ending the life she thought she had built. Her breath came shallow, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach. Evelyn leaned close and whispered, "You're doing fine. Don't let him see your fear." But Ambrose saw something. He smirked faintly, sensing weakness like a predator smelling blood. "You think you're strong, Jacqueline? Look at you, shaking. Do you really think you can survive without me? You're carrying my child, living in my home, spending my money. Without me, you're nothing." The words hit like a whip. For a second, her vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to throw the papers across the room, to collapse under the crushing humiliation. Her body, heavy with pregnancy, felt like a burden. The years of sacrifice, the nights she spent waiting alone, the love she had poured into this marriage, it all came crashing back. Margaret reached toward her, but Jacqueline pulled away. She didn't want pity. She wanted strength. Yet in that moment, strength felt like an illusion. Her mind drifted to her parents, to the small home she grew up in, to the nights when her father fixed cars late into the evening, while her mother marked papers by the kitchen lamp. They had dreamed bigger dreams for her. They had raised her to believe in love, in loyalty. What would they say now, seeing her sitting in this cold palace, betrayed by the man she once trusted most? The tears she had held back threatened to spill. Evelyn touched her arm gently, a reminder to breathe. Jacqueline closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. But Ambrose saw the flicker of pain and pressed harder. "Sign the papers if you want," he sneered, "but you'll come crawling back. You won't last a month without me. Women like you never do." Cassandra stirred beside him, eager to regain her place. "He's right, Jacqueline," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "You're just a tired little wife. You don't belong in his world anymore. Look at you, swollen, miserable. I'm what he needs. I'm the future." The cruelty sliced through Jacqueline's defenses. Her hand shook visibly now, and she lowered her gaze to the table. For the first time that morning, she felt cornered, defeated. Her heart squeezed painfully as if all her resolve had been for nothing. Evelyn leaned closer again. "Don't let them win. Not like this." But the voices in Jacqueline's mind were louder than Evelyn's encouragement. What if they were right? What if she couldn't survive? She had no career anymore, no income of her own. Ambrose controlled the accounts, the properties, everything. She had sacrificed too much for him, and now she was left with almost nothing. How would she raise a child alone in a city like this? Her hands trembled harder. The room blurred with tears. For one terrifying second she wanted to give in, to let Ambrose win, to let Cassandra laugh, to crumble into the quiet, obedient woman they thought she was. And Ambrose saw it. His smirk returned, crueler than ever. He leaned back in his chair, his confidence swelling again. "See? She can't do it. She doesn't have the strength." Jacqueline's chest tightened. Her breathing turned shallow. She excused herself, rising unsteadily from her chair. I need air," she murmured, her voice breaking. Evelyn moved to follow, but Jacqueline shook her head. She didn't want witnesses to her collapse. She staggered out of the lounge and into the wide hallway of the penthouse. The marble floor blurred beneath her, her reflection in the glossy walls looking like a stranger. She stumbled into the nursery. The room she had lovingly prepared, painted in soft creams and blues, filled with tiny clothes and stuffed animals. She gripped the edge of the crib, her tears finally spilling. The pain racked her chest, her sobs breaking the silence. For the first time since this began, Jacqueline allowed herself to fall apart. She pressed her forehead to the crib's wooden rail and wept. "Why? Why did you do this to me, Ambrose? Why wasn't I enough?" Her hand moved to her belly, trembling. "How do I raise this child alone? How do I protect him when I feel so broken?" Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, clutching her stomach as though it were her only anchor. The weight of betrayal crushed her, the enormity of the future suffocating her. In the lounge, Ambrose smirked at Evelyn. "She's gone to cry like she always does. This is who she is. Weak." But Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She had seen women like Jacqueline before. Women who broke, only to rebuild stronger than anyone expected. She knew the breakdown was not the end. It was the spark. Back in the nursery, Jacqueline wiped her tears, staring at the crib. The tiny clothes, the folded blankets, the stuffed bear with a ribbon around its neck. She whispered to the child inside her. "I don't know how yet, but I will protect you. I will not let him win." She stood slowly, her tears drying on her cheeks, her reflection in the window clearer now. She was still trembling, still raw, still hurt. But in her eyes, beneath the pain, something new flickered. It wasn't surrender, it was survival. And as she straightened her back, the sound of the lounge doors creaking open told her someone was coming. Someone who might change everything. The nursery door creaked open, and Jacqueline instinctively wiped her cheeks. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, broken, sitting on the floor with swollen eyes. But the figure that entered wasn't Ambrose or Cassandra. It was Evelyn Carter, the lawyer, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood. "Jacqueline," Evelyn said gently, crouching down so she was eye level. "You did well in there. Don't think your tears mean you failed. They mean you're human." Jacqueline shook her head, her voice breaking. "He's right, Evelyn. What if I can't survive without him? He controls everything. The accounts, the house, even the nursery furniture. What do I have?" Evelyn's expression shifted, sharp and knowing. "You have more than you realize. Ambrose made one critical mistake, one he doesn't know you've already discovered." Jacqueline blinked, her tears pausing. "What mistake?" Evelyn opened her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. She handed it to Jacqueline, her eyes glittering with quiet triumph. "This." With trembling hands, Jacqueline tore it open. Inside was a set of documents, bank statements, ownership certificates, legal transfers. Her eyes scanned the pages, disbelief flooding her face. "These are," she gasped, "these are in my name." Evelyn nodded. "Correct. Months ago, Ambrose tried to hide assets in an offshore account. He thought he was clever, transferring properties into a dummy corporation. But his arrogance betrayed him. He used your maiden name as a cover, assuming no one would look twice. That oversight means legally you are the listed owner of those assets, and it's worth millions." Jacqueline's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. For months she had felt powerless, convinced Ambrose held all the cards. But here, in her hands, was proof that the empire he had tried to hide was already under her control. "But why didn't he know?" she whispered. "Because men like Ambrose don't bother checking the details," Evelyn said coldly. "They assume their wives are too blind to ever look. He still thinks those accounts are invisible. He doesn't know that with one signature, you can freeze his funds, transfer ownership, and leave him with nothing." Jacqueline's tears dried instantly. Her body still shook, but this time with something new: power. For the first time since her nightmare began, she wasn't trapped. She wasn't the weak, trembling wife he thought she was. She was holding the key to his downfall. The baby kicked inside her belly as if sensing the change. She placed a hand on her stomach, whispering, "We're going to be okay." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Better than okay. You're about to show Ambrose that the woman he thought was powerless is the one who will end him." Jacqueline straightened slowly, rising to her feet. The nursery around her no longer looked like a cage. It looked like a battlefield. And she was ready to fight. They returned to the lounge. Ambrose was leaning back in his chair, laughing bitterly, as if he'd already won. Cassandra sat close to him again, her confidence tentatively restored by Jacqueline's brief retreat. "There she is," Ambrose sneered. Back from her little cry, ready to sign and get this over with, Jacqueline walked to her seat calmly, the envelope still in her hand. She sat, folded her hands neatly on the tables and looked Ambrose dead in the eye. "No, Ambrose, I'm ready to end this, on my terms." Evelyn slid the documents onto the table. Ambrose frowned, curiosity flickering into unease. "What's this?" "Your biggest mistake," Jacqueline said. Evelyn's voice carried the final blow. "Mr. Blackwell, as of this morning, Jacqueline is the legal owner of 3 properties in the Hamptons, 2 high-rise buildings downtown, and an account containing $36 million. All registered under her name, thanks to your sloppy attempts to hide your assets." The blood drained from Ambrose's face. "That's impossible." "Check for yourself," Evelyn said, tapping the papers. Ambrose snatched the documents, his hands trembling as he scanned the pages. Each line confirmed what Evelyn had said. His arrogance had betrayed him. The assets he thought untouchable had already slipped through his fingers and into Jacqueline's hands. Cassandra leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Ambrose, is this true?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was louder than any admission. Jacqueline's voice was steady, her calm terrifying. You see, Ambrose, while you were busy parading your mistress, I was protecting myself. You thought I was weak, but I was preparing. Every lie you told, every dollar you tried to hide, I collected. And now, the empire you built is mine. Ambrose slammed the papers onto the table. You can't do this. I already have, Jacqueline said. The room erupted. Margaret gasped. Harold leaned forward with a rare glimmer of respect in his eyes. Cassandra shifted away from Ambrose, realizing his empire was crumbling, and with it, her own future. Ambrose stood, his chair toppling backward, his face twisted with rage. You think you've won? You think you can humiliate me like this? Jacqueline rose too, her belly prominent, her eyes unshakable. This isn't about humiliation. This is about truth. You destroyed our marriage, Ambrose. You disrespected me, our child, and everything I sacrificed. And now you will face the consequences. The words echoed through the lounge, louder than any outburst Ambrose had ever made. For the first time, it was Jacqueline's voice that carried power. Ambrose's fists clenched. He wanted to shout, to strike, to regain control. But the documents on the table mocked him. His father's glare burned through him. His mother's tears shamed him. His mistress's silence betrayed him. And his wife, no, not his wife anymore, but his judge had stripped him bare. Cassandra shifted her seat further away, her hand slipping from his arm. She could see where this was heading. Ambrose was sinking, and she had no intention of sinking with him. Ambrose's chest heaved, his voice breaking into a roar. You'll regret this, Jacqueline. You'll regret crossing me. But Jacqueline didn't flinch. She placed her hand on her belly, her voice calm and resolute. No, Ambrose, the only regret here is yours. And as the weight of her words settled, Ambrose realized the empire he thought was unshakable was already collapsing. And it was his pregnant wife who had dealt the final blow. The day after the confrontation in the penthouse, Manhattan felt like a different city to Jacqueline. The skyscrapers still pierced the sky, the traffic still roared, and the sidewalks still pulsed with life. But for the first time in years, she wasn't walking through it as Ambrose Blackwell's wife. She was walking as Jacqueline Mitchell, her own woman, her own name, her own power. The papers Evelyn Carter handed her had changed everything. For months, Jacqueline had lived in fear, convinced she was trapped in Ambrose's shadow. But now, the shadow was gone. The empire Ambrose had tried to hide was legally hers, and the public exposure of his betrayal had shattered the illusion of his invincibility. Still, victory came with scars. That night, after everyone left, Jacqueline sat alone in the nursery, staring at the tiny crib. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded and exhaustion weighed on her body. She touched her belly, whispering to the child within, "We made it through." But this is just the beginning. She realized she couldn't just win a battle. She had to rebuild her entire life. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at her apartment with a cup of coffee and a sharp look in her eyes. "You did it," she said, "but now you need to show the world who you are. You can't just survive Ambrose, Jacqueline. You have to surpass him." Jacqueline frowned. "How? I've been out of the world for so long. I gave up my career. I don't even recognize the woman in the mirror anymore." Evelyn smiled knowingly. "Then it's time you meet her again." And so began Jacqueline's transformation. The first step was practical, reclaiming her independence. Evelyn introduced her to a financial advisor, a woman named Claire, who spoke with calm authority. Together they went through the accounts, the properties, the hidden assets Ambrose had tried to bury. Claire explained each step, guiding Jacqueline in how to manage her newfound power. For the first time, Jacqueline saw numbers not as chains, but as keys. Every dollar Ambrose had once used to control her was now fuel for her freedom. The second step was personal. Jacqueline stood in front of her mirror one evening, staring at the woman reflected back. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes tired, her body heavy with pregnancy. But beneath that fatigue was strength. She booked a simple haircut, one that framed her face and restored her confidence. She shopped for maternity clothes that weren't just functional, but elegant. Soft silk dresses, tailored coats, shoes that gave her height without sacrificing comfort. Each piece was a declaration. She was not broken. She was reborn. When she walked through the streets of Manhattan after her makeover, heads turned. Not because she was Ambrose's wife, but because she radiated something he never gave her permission to own: authority. The third step was emotional. For weeks, she attended quiet therapy sessions where she unpacked the years of gaslighting, the nights of loneliness, the humiliation of betrayal. The therapist reminded her that strength wasn't the absence of pain, it was the choice to rise despite it. Each session was like peeling away another layer of shame, until what remained was not a victim, but a survivor. The final step was symbolic. Evelyn arranged for Jacqueline to attend the Bright Futures Gala, the very same event where Ambrose had once flaunted Cassandra as if Jacqueline didn't exist. This time, Jacqueline wouldn't be the woman hidden at home. She would walk into that ballroom as herself, radiant, pregnant, and untouchable. On the night of the gala, Jacqueline stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection. The gown Evelyn had helped her choose was deep emerald, the color of renewal and strength. It hugged her belly gracefully, transforming her pregnancy from a vulnerability into a crown. Her hair shimmered under the light, her makeup soft but commanding. "You look powerful," Evelyn said, standing behind her. Jacqueline took a deep breath. "I feel powerful." The limousine ride to the gala felt surreal. As the car glided through the streets, Jacqueline watched the city lights reflect against the windows. This was the city that had once made her feel small. Tonight, it would see her rise. When she stepped into the ballroom, silence followed her. Conversations paused, glasses froze midair. Whispers erupted across the room. "That's Jacqueline Blackwell. She looks incredible. Did you hear what happened with Ambrose? They say she owns half his empire now." The very people who once pitied her now stared in awe, some even in fear. And then across the room she saw him. Ambrose. His tuxedo was perfect, his smile carefully practiced, but his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't expected her. He hadn't expected her to shine. Cassandra clung to his arm, but even she looked rattled, her confidence no match for Jacqueline's quiet fire. For the first time in their marriage, Ambrose looked small standing in the same room as her. Jacqueline lifted her chin, letting the cameras capture her, letting the whispers grow. She didn't need to approach him. Her presence was enough. She was no longer defined by his betrayal. She was defined by her survival. As the orchestra swelled and the gala resumed, Evelyn leaned toward her. "This is just the beginning, Jacqueline. The city has seen you fall. Now it will see you rise." Jacqueline smiled faintly, her hand resting on her belly. She wasn't just rising for herself. She was rising for the life she carried, for the future she would shape without Ambrose. And as she stood under the chandeliers, glowing with strength and dignity, she knew the battle wasn't over. Because soon, she would not only rise above Ambrose, she would confront him publicly and end his reign once and for all. The chandeliers glittered above the grand ballroom of the Bright Futures Gala, scattering light across crystal glasses and gowns worth small fortunes. The city's elite had gathered, their conversations a hum of wealth and ambition. Photographers hovered near the red carpet entrance, waiting for the night's most powerful arrivals. And then, Jacqueline entered. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras flashed, capturing her emerald gown flowing gracefully over her pregnant belly. Her shoulders squared with quiet confidence. For months, she had been a subject of whispers, the betrayed wife, the humiliated mother-to-be. But tonight, she walked as though she had been reborn. Her entrance was deliberate. Every step across the marble floor was a declaration. She was no longer hiding. Evelyn Carter walked beside her, calm and watchful, a silent guardian at her side. Together, they drew the eyes of the entire ballroom. Across the room, Ambrose froze. He had been entertaining a circle of investors, his smile wide, his hand firmly gripping Cassandra's waist. For weeks, he had tried to rebuild his image, insisting the rumors of betrayal were exaggerated, that his marriage troubles were private. But the sight of Jacqueline, radiant and unshaken, shattered his composure. "Ambrose," whispered one of the investors, "isn't that your wife?" Ambrose's jaw tightened. "Ex-wife," he muttered, though the divorce wasn't finalized. Cassandra's grip on his arm tightened, her eyes darting nervously toward Jacqueline. The mistress had expected Jacqueline to stay hidden, broken. She hadn't anticipated this. A woman transformed into a force that threatened to eclipse them both. Jacqueline moved through the crowd, heads turning as she passed. Some guests whispered in awe, others in pity, but all recognized the drama about to unfold. At the center of the ballroom, she stopped. A waiter offered her champagne, but she waved it away, resting her hand on her stomach instead. Ambrose, forced by dozens of curious eyes, crossed the room to confront her. His smile was strained, his voice low. "What do you think you're doing here?" Jacqueline lifted her chin. "Taking back my place." He glanced around at the watching faces, his mask slipping. "Don't make a scene." She gave a soft, almost amused laugh. "You made the scene, Ambrose. I'm just finishing it." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption, but since so many of you are investors, business partners, and supposed friends of Mr. Blackwell, you deserve to know the truth." The crowd leaned in, their curiosity sharpening into hunger. Manhattan thrived on scandals, and tonight promised a feast. Evelyn produced a folder from her sleek clutch. "We have here evidence of Mr. Blackwell's misconduct, misappropriation of company funds, concealed assets, and, most damningly, an affair flaunted while his wife carried his child. He may claim to be a man of integrity, but the records show otherwise." Gasps erupted. Phones rose into the air, recording. Ambrose's face drained of color. "Stop this," he hissed. "Do you know what you're doing?" "Yes," Jacqueline said firmly, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm showing everyone who you really are." Cassandra tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "This is ridiculous. No one cares about personal drama." Evelyn cut her off. "This isn't just personal. Ambrose used corporate accounts to fund hotel stays, luxury gifts, even flights for his mistress. That isn't personal. That's fraud." The crowd erupted again, whispers turning into sharp murmurs. Investors exchanged glances, calculating losses. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Ambrose staggered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You won't survive this," he muttered to Jacqueline. "Do you think they'll respect you more than me?" Jacqueline's eyes blazed. "I don't need their respect. I already have my freedom, and soon my child will have a life without you poisoning it." Her words landed like a slap, the crowd gasping again. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing every flicker of Ambrose's unraveling composure. Cassandra slipped away quietly, sensing the ship sinking beneath her feet. Then Evelyn delivered the final blow. She held up a signed document, her voice ringing clear. "For those concerned about your investments, you should know. The controlling stake in 3 of Blackwell Holdings' most valuable properties now rests in Jacqueline Mitchell's name. Ambrose doesn't control them anymore. She does." The room fell into stunned silence. Then came the murmurs, the shifting alliances. Investors turned their backs on Ambrose, moving toward Jacqueline. Journalists rushed forward, snapping photos of her, as though she were the star of the evening. Ambrose's voice cracked, desperation spilling out. "You can't do this to me. You're my wife." Jacqueline stepped closer, her hand firm on her stomach, her eyes unflinching. "No, Ambrose, I was your wife, and you destroyed that. Tonight I'm something more. I'm the woman who ended your reign." The orchestra, sensing the moment, struck a dramatic note. The crowd erupted into applause. Not for Ambrose, but for Jacqueline. In that instant, she wasn't a victim. She was victorious. Ambrose stumbled back, his face pale, his empire crumbling before his eyes. The cameras caught it all. The fall of a man who thought himself untouchable, brought down not by rivals, but by the wife he underestimated. Jacqueline stood tall, radiant under the chandeliers, her presence commanding the entire room. She had endured humiliation, heartbreak, and betrayal, but now she was the one holding power. And as the applause swelled, she leaned close enough for Ambrose to hear, her words like a dagger. "This is just the beginning. Tomorrow, the world will know everything." The morning after the Bright Futures Gala, Manhattan buzzed with one headline. Every newspaper, every online magazine, every social media feed carried the same image. Jacqueline Mitchell Blackwell, radiant in emerald, standing tall while Ambrose Blackwell wilted beside her. "Queen Jacqueline claims her throne," screamed one headline. "Betrayed wife destroys tycoon," read another. And perhaps the most satisfying, "Ambrose Blackwell, the fall of a king." Jacqueline sipped her tea in the quiet of her apartment, her baby shifting gently inside her. For once, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't crying. She was free. The phone rang constantly, reporters begging for interviews, charities asking her to speak, investors offering partnerships. Evelyn screened them all, keeping the noise at bay. "You don't need to rush," she said firmly. "You've already won. Now you decide how to write the next chapter." Meanwhile, Ambrose's empire collapsed like a house of cards. Investors withdrew, board members resigned, and Cassandra vanished from the public eye. His father, Harold, issued a rare statement condemning his son's actions and praising Jacqueline's courage. Margaret sent flowers and a note that read, "You showed more dignity in one night than Ambrose has in his entire life." Ambrose himself retreated into silence. Once the golden boy of Wall Street, he was now the cautionary tale. Paparazzi caught glimpses of him leaving hotels alone, unshaven, his arrogance gone. The man who once sneered, "Without me, you're nothing," had become exactly that. Nothing. For Jacqueline, the weeks that followed were not just about revenge, but about renewal. She turned her focus inward, preparing for motherhood with strength she hadn't known she possessed. She enrolled in classes for new mothers, met with designers to finally reopen her dream of an interior design studio, and reconnected with old friends she had abandoned under Ambrose's control. One afternoon, as she painted a mural in the nursery, a sky of hot air balloons drifting over rolling hills, Evelyn walked in smiling. "The world wants to hear your voice," she said. "They've heard about your pain. Now, let them hear your power." Jacqueline hesitated. "Do you think they'll listen?" Evelyn nodded. "They already are. What you did at the gala wasn't just about Ambrose. It was about every woman who's been silenced, every wife who's been told she's nothing. You stood up, and they saw themselves in you." So Jacqueline agreed. Her first public speech took place at a women's empowerment conference. The stage was simple, the audience vast. As she stepped up to the podium, cameras flashed, but this time, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't Ambrose's shadow. She was herself. She spoke of betrayal, of sacrifice, of the nights she spent alone while Ambrose flaunted his mistress. She spoke of the fear of raising a child alone, of the pain of being dismissed as nothing. And then, she spoke of the moment she decided she would not stay silent. Her voice grew stronger as she declared, "I was told I was weak. I was told I was powerless. But women are never powerless. We carry life. We carry families. We carry entire generations on our shoulders. And when we are betrayed, we do not crumble. We rise." I rose, and so can you. The audience erupted in applause. Women stood with tears in their eyes, clapping, shouting her name. For the first time, Jacqueline felt not just victorious, but whole. Back home that evening, she sat in the nursery, now finished with her mural. She whispered to her unborn child, "You'll never grow up seeing your mother broken. You'll see her strong. You'll know that love is not about sacrifice, but about respect. And you'll know that when life tries to crush you, you can always rise." The day she gave birth was quiet and intimate. Surrounded only by Evelyn and a few close friends, Jacqueline welcomed her son into the world. She held him close, tears streaming, whispering, "We're free now." News outlets tried to capture the moment, but Jacqueline declined interviews. "This is ours," she said softly, "not theirs." Weeks later, Ambrose attempted one last desperate move. He tried to challenge the property transfers in court. But Evelyn was ready. The judge reviewed the evidence, his signatures, his fraudulent transfers, and ruled decisively in Jacqueline's favor. Ambrose lost everything. As the gavel struck, Jacqueline didn't even look at him. She didn't need to. The man who once controlled her life was now irrelevant. Months passed, and Jacqueline's design studio opened in a bright corner of Manhattan. The sign above the door read simply, "Mitchell Interiors." Clients poured in, eager to work with the woman who had become a symbol of strength. Business boomed, not because of scandal, but because of her talent, a talent she had once sacrificed, now finally free to flourish. Everywhere she went, people stopped her. Some whispered thank you, others asked for advice, many simply smiled. She had become more than the wife of a tycoon. She had become an icon of resilience. One evening, as she locked the studio and stepped into the cool night, Evelyn joined her. They looked out at the city lights, the same lights that once seemed so cold. "You did it," Evelyn said softly. Jacqueline nodded. "No, we did it. Every woman who's ever been silenced, every mother who's ever been abandoned. This wasn't just my victory, it was theirs too." Evelyn smiled. "And Ambrose?" Jacqueline shook her head, her expression calm. "Ambrose is a chapter I've closed. My story isn't about him anymore. It's about me, about my son, about the life we're building." They walked in silence for a moment, the city alive around them. Jacqueline felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by a future she had written herself. And as she looked at the skyline, she whispered the words that had carried her through the storm: "We rise." And with that, Jacqueline's story closed, not in defeat, not in bitterness, but in triumph. A reminder to every viewer that no betrayal, no humiliation, and no heartbreak can silence a woman who decides to rise. So my friends, that's how the story closes. If you're still here with me until this very moment, it must mean something in this journey has touched your heart in a personal way. Maybe you've known betrayal, maybe you've known silence, or maybe you've just carried pain that felt too heavy for too long. And if that's true, I want you to take a deep breath right now and hear this. You are stronger than you think. What Jacqueline showed us is not just drama, it's truth. Life will test you, people will disappoint you. But as Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. She thought she was powerless. But the moment she chose her dignity over fear, everything changed. That's not just her story. That can be yours too. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Jacqueline could have stayed broken, but she didn't. She rose. And in her rising, she gave all of us a mirror. To remember that even when life feels like it's against us, we still have a choice to rise, to heal, to rewrite our story. So maybe this isn't really about Ambrose at all. Maybe it's about you, about the storms you've walked through, about the nights you thought you couldn't make it, and the mornings you still rose anyway. That's what this story is truly about, resilience. If this touched you tonight, my dear friends, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this story. Leave a like so I know it reached you. And if you want more stories that remind you of your strength, then hit that subscribe button and stay with us. Because together, we're not just watching drama. We're learning how to rise, again and again.